Hey, my name is Chris Brennan, and this is your year-ahead horoscope forecast for the zodiac sign of Cancer for the entire year of 2025. So my horoscopes are designed for those that have either their sun sign in Cancer or their rising sign in Cancer, and I'm going to give a sort of a big picture overview of some of the major trends and astrological themes that are coming up over the course of the next 12 months. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. So this is the planetary movements calendar that shows where the planets will start at the beginning of the year and how far through the signs of the zodiac they'll get by the end of the year, which helps to show that we have some clustering of different planets in different sectors of your chart over the next 12 months. So these are some of the things I'm going to cover roughly chronologically, although I'm going to also rank them in terms of importance at different points. And I want to start at the beginning of the year with one of the major transits, which is Mars is actually retrograde in your second house of finances and your first house of self. So Mars stationed retrograde in December, and it's in your second house of finances and will move backwards into your first house of self at the very beginning of January. So the initial part of this transit may be a little bit tricky or challenging when it comes to financial matters. That may be something you're experiencing in December. There can be extra expenditures during that time. It's good to exercise caution due to a tendency sometimes to spend impulsively or without thinking it out first and then potentially regretting it later. But that transit is fading into the background really quickly at the beginning of January, and Mars backs up and it moves into the sign of Cancer into your first house, which is the house of self, body, mind, and also appearance. So one of the things about this transit, it's going to last for roughly the first 4 months of the year that Mars is going to be transiting your rising sign. And one of the things you want to be careful about during this transit is that Mars can sometimes be the planet of strife and conflict. And when it's transiting your first house, sometimes you can become a little bit more irritable compared to other times in your life. So greater tendency to irritability, being quick to anger, being more impulsive during this period than at other times in your life. So one of the things that you have to do is kind of exercise caution and restraint because not just because you can end up initiating conflicts that end up becoming a bigger deal than you might anticipate or intend at first, that could cause strife in relationships and other things like that. But also the energy of Mars, you're just going to have so much more energy and so much more drive, but also more impulsiveness during this time. And sometimes that can have the side effect of we can act without thinking, which can sometimes result in getting into accidents or having other types of injuries or ailments to the body, which is represented by the first house. And so that's why you want to be extra careful during this time, just in order to avoid some of the potential downsides of that transit. All right, so that's the Mars retrograde that's lasting for the first 4 months of the year. But what's interesting is that starting in June, for the entire second half of the year, the planet Jupiter moves into Cancer and goes into your first house of mind, body, and self. So it basically goes through the same sector of the chart that Mars was in the first 4 months of the year. And Jupiter is a positive planet that will clean up and sort of fix some of the problems that Mars may have left behind, or will sweep up some of the dust that was left in the aftermath of that Mars transit. So this is actually really positive because it indicates not just a period of alleviation of some of those Mars issues from earlier in the year, which may pertain to like strife or conflict, but Jupiter also improves and expands and grows whatever part of the chart that it's in. So since it's going through your first house, that's just a generally positive transit that lasts for the entire second half of 2025, as well as the first half of 2026, because it's a year-long transit. So this is a period where you might start feeling extra optimistic. You might start planning things for the long term. Jupiter is also the planet of luck. So during this time, some of the actions that you take and the things that you do are going to have a greater chance of success just in general. partially because you're going to be approaching things with a better outlook than usual and almost sort of like projecting out a positive vision for the future. But also sometimes there's different times in our life where we just find ourselves in the right place at the right time and doing the right things. And for Cancer, especially in the second half of 2025, I think that's one of your themes for this year. It can also be a good period to improve your body and physical vitality when Jupiter's going through your first house. So you may want to do some things or start some new things in order to improve your body or even potentially your appearance. Sometimes people like have a makeover or change something about their appearance at this time in order to better reflect themselves internally. And that could be a very positive thing for you here as well. All right, so those are those transits for the first part of the year. In the second half of the year, the planet Uranus, it's going to depart from your 11th house of friends and groups, where for the past several years, since about 2018, Uranus has been bringing a lot of major changes, a lot of disruptions, and also sometimes some innovations or some fun and excitement to your 11th house of friends and groups and alliances. So that transit is entering its final stages in 2025 and 2026, and we're going to get an initial preview of Uranus dipping into your 12th house. So the 12th house is kind of tricky because the 12th house sometimes has to do with people that we don't get along with very well in our life. And when Uranus goes into that house, sometimes there can be unexpected disruptions that come up with respect to those people. So Uranus is typically experienced as the planet of freedom and of having this intense drive to break away from things that were holding you back previously. So it may be that there were some situations with people you don't get along with, or even people that you consider enemies in your life, that you suddenly have this intense urge to break away from some of those negative or not very supportive relationships in your life. So that's going to come into focus in the second half of the year once Uranus moves into that sign. The 12th house can also sometimes have to do with ways in which we undermine ourselves. So you may be able to start looking at yourself with a little bit greater clarity at this time, and maybe finding some ways to break free of past patterns and behaviors that are no longer serving you, and instead having sort of like a revolution when it comes to how you treat yourself in the future. And this can be both in terms of external things, but also in terms of internal things, where sometimes 12th house transits can be really good in terms of going inward and having sort of internal revolutions through things like therapy or other internal journeys, which help to bring you to sort of a new chapter of your life with respect to how you treat yourself and how you try to avoid undermining yourself in different ways. All right, so that's the beginning of that Uranus transit in the second half of the year. The next transits I want to talk about is that it looks like the eclipses are shifting into your third house and ninth house axis, where eclipses are going to start taking place in Virgo and Pisces. They've actually already started as of last September. There was one in your ninth house of education and travel. And this is tied in with another shift that's happening where Saturn and Neptune are going to depart from your ninth house, which they've been transiting for Neptune for many years, since like 2011, and Saturn for the past couple of years now, since early 2023. So what this shift is about, especially with the eclipses, is major beginnings and major endings when it comes to the topics of education and learning, communication and how you communicate what you know to the world. And also the topic of travel is a major third house, ninth house theme, as well as movement and mobility and how you get around both locally, but also potentially like internationally or globally. So with ninth house eclipses taking place, the ninth house can represent education and learning, but also our beliefs and our systems of beliefs. And there may be some things that are changing there where you hit a point where you've come to the end of a chapter with respect to some thing that you used to believe or something that you're in the process of letting go. But every time you end a chapter, you're also opening up a new one. So there may be some new educational or philosophical or even like political things that you're exploring that are starting now that may seem small or inconsequential at first, but eventually will grow into, and you'll realize in retrospect that it was a major turning point for you with respect to your beliefs later on. So part of that also with eclipses in the third house is learning how to communicate what you believe and what you think about the world and what you've learned. And you may go through a process over the next couple of years about learning how to communicate better and more effectively after some different highs and low points, basically, with respect to that over the next year or so. All right, so major beginnings and endings in that sector of your chart. There's also Saturn has been transiting through your ninth house for the past few years, which could sometimes bring some challenges or obstacles or difficulties to education, beliefs, travel, religion, or other things like that. And also Neptune is departing from your ninth house as well, which can probably, for the past decade, has made things a little bit more nebulous, where you may have been under a false impression for certain things, or you may have had an overly idealistic orientation towards believing in something or learning something. But when Saturn came through that house over the past couple of years, it brought some cold, hard reality. And that's just getting accelerated by some of the eclipses that are starting to take place there at this point as well. So the main thing I want to focus on with this transit of Saturn-Neptune is they're actually departing from your ninth house of belief and they're moving into your 10th house of career. So Saturn moving into your 10th house of career can sometimes bring some obstacles and setbacks with respect to career matters, but usually it's sort of like surmountable difficulties where something comes up and then you have to expend effort to overcome it, but as a result of that, you become stronger as a result. At the same time, with Neptune going into your 10th house at the same time, there may be some sense of like nebulousness where things become a little bit less clear with respect to your career and life direction. And I think these are going to be tensions that are going to become really apparent in the second half, especially in the middle of 2025, where you have Saturn on the one hand that's drawing you in one direction with respect to your career and asking you to be really realistic and really objective and really almost like cold about it, almost to the point potentially of pessimism, whereas Neptune going into your 10th house of career is going to be drawing you in the other direction of being potentially overly idealistic, having a sort of like romanticized view of your life direction, or even not having your feet on the ground, so to speak, so that you're sort of imagining things as being way better than they actually are. So those tensions are going to become apparent in the middle part of 2025, and I think it'll be important to pay attention to what arises after Saturn and Neptune go into that sector of your chart, because it's going to be a preview of some longer term transits that are going to play out over the next several years, with Saturn spending about 3 years in the sign of Aries going through your 10th house, and Neptune spending about a decade going through that sector of your chart. So pay attention to those shifts because they could be intimations of something more significant. All right, so along with that, you've been having eclipses take place over the past year in your 4th house of home and family and your 10th house of career and life direction. And in the spring, in like the March-April time frame, we're going to get the last eclipse in your 10th house of career, indicating a major beginning or major ending, probably both, in that sector of your chart. So since you've been having eclipses in your 4th and 10th house, there's probably been some changes at home or changes in terms of your private life and your family over the past year that have been tied in some way with your career and your overall life direction. So some of those themes should already be apparent, but they reach a sort of culmination in the March-April timeframe, and there's some sort of major ending with respect to career, but also laying the seeds or the foundations for some sort of major beginning. So that's interesting how that ties in with everything. And then, of course, if that wasn't enough, there's one more 10th house transit, which is that Venus goes retrograde in the spring around the same time as that eclipse in the March-April timeframe, it stations retrograde in your 10th house of career, and then it retrogrades back to your 9th house of beliefs and education and philosophy. And for some of you, there's going to be things that you have to go back and rethink in terms of your career and in terms of your beliefs and educations. There could be some people coming back from the past or some situations coming back from the past that become relevant to you again now, especially from about 8 years ago. Venus went retrograde in the same sector of your chart in the spring of 2017. So in some instances, you may be able to go back and look at that period and see a sort of preview or a connection between what was happening at that point in your life and what happens now in the spring of 2025. But for those of you, especially with night charts, I think this is going to be a very positive transit, especially when Venus stations in your 10th house of career, because sometimes this can be a period in which since the 10th represents not just our career, but our reputation, where things are going better, where we're receiving recognition for some things that we've done, where we're having success in general in the career sphere. That's usually a very positive transit, especially for the night chart people. So that's something that I would look forward to. It may cause you it may reflect when Venus retrogrades back into your 9th house of belief and education and travel. You may have to go back and review some things in that area of your life that need to be reviewed and revisited in some way. But ultimately, I think this is going to be a very positive transit and should really help to kick off some of the other 10th house career things that I've talked about from other transits that are going to be taking place over the course of the rest of 2025. So yeah, it just seems like a big year for career for you especially, and secondarily for education and beliefs and potentially travel. So those are the two topics that I would focus on, and otherwise it looks like a great year for Cancer in 2025. All right, so that's it for your transits. If this was mainly a forecast and an overview of the general themes this year, but if you're looking for another list of dates on when to do things, like I just recently released my 2025 electional astrology report, where I go through each of the next 12 months of next year and I pick out the best dates that are the most fortunate astrologically for doing different things. And people have used my annual reports to launch businesses or get married or take a major trip or other things like that, just because it gives you the best dates for doing things in the following year. So I'm running a 20% off sale until the first week of January as just a launch sale. So you can get it for 20% off right now at theastrologypodcast.com/2025 report. All right, that's it for this forecast. So good luck in 2025, and I'll see you again next year. I just released my 2025 astrology calendar posters, which show all of the major astrological transits this year at a glance, and you can get those at theastrologypodcast.com/merch. If you want to learn more about my approach to astrology, then I teach an online course in ancient astrology called the Hellenistic Astrology Course, which has hundreds of hours of video lectures where I teach people how to read birth charts and how to understand and predict the future using transits and other timing techniques. So you can find out more information at theastrologyschool.com. Also, shout out to our sponsor for this episode, which is the Northwest Astrology Conference, which is happening in May of 2025 in Seattle, Washington, and it's being simultaneously streamed online at the same time. So you can find out more information at norwac.net. Finally, thanks to the patrons that helped to support the production of this episode of the Astrology Podcast through my page on Patreon. You can get early access to new episodes plus other bonus content by becoming a patron at patreon.com/astrologypodcast.